They thought they were writing your ending, scribbling the last lines in blood and ash, laughing as they walked away from the wreckage. But they didn't understand. You were never the victim in their story. You were the spark buried in the ruins, the silence before the eruption. Every cut they made became scripture on your skin, carved proof that you survived what should have buried you. While they watched from gilded towers built on false power, you were learning, bleeding, yes, breaking, maybe, but rebuilding into something untouchable. You didn't heal clean. You healed sharp. They thought solitude would silence you. Instead, it amplified the storm. Now, you don't just carry scars, you wield them. And as they stand, smug in their illusion of control, unaware of what they've awakened, they fail to see you are the reckoning they've summoned. One they cannot command. One they will never survive. They never saw the whole of you, only fragments. Pieces they believed were fragile. They mistook your silence for surrender, your stillness for weakness, your cracked voice for defeat. What they didn't see was what churned beneath, a storm without mercy, a soul tempered in the fires of its own undoing. They thought pain would reduce you to ash. But you weren't made of paper, you were forged from something older, something defiant. Bone and grit and fury. Every betrayal was meant to gut you, to leave you bleeding and begging for some hand to pull you from the abyss. But you learned quickly that the only hand worth reaching for was your own. They fed you agony and expected obedience. They handed you silence and expected submission. But pain, raw and unapologetic, became your scripture. It spoke not in riddles, but in hard, brutal truths. It told you who you were, and more importantly, who you were not. You were not theirs to break. Not their puppet. Not their casualty. They thought they were writing your epitaph when they whispered behind your back, when they turned their faces away in the hour you needed them most. But those moments, they didn't crush you. They chiseled you into stone, into steel. At first, you didn't even recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror. Haunted eyes, tired bones, a kind of hollow echo inside your chest where softness used to live. But something else was taking root in that silence, something older, something monstrous. You stopped mourning the parts of you they trampled. You started reclaiming them. And with each breath, you grew less human and more elemental. Your kindness sharpened into discernment. Your patience eroded into resolve. You rose not like the dawn, gentle and warm, but like fire rising from coals, furious, untamed, incandescent. You realized pain never wanted to destroy you. It wanted to mold you. The universe was never punishing you. It was refining you, stripping away illusion, revealing the weapon you were born to become. And in the ruins of every betrayal, every lie, every night you cried quietly because your pain made others uncomfortable, you began to see it. The pattern, the unveiling, the transformation, not into who they wanted, but into who you needed to be. The blood on your hands isn't shame, it's history. The scars aren't shameful, they're sacred. proved that you walked through hell without flinching. They don't get to say who you are anymore. You do. And in claiming that, in owning every fracture and shadow within you, you've become something they can't comprehend. They weren't breaking you. They were building you. And now, with every step forward, you carry the ghosts of your past not as burdens but as proof, as warnings, as fuel. Because the version of you that once begged for peace no longer exists. You don't just survive now. You dominate. You become the storm, the reckoning, the reminder that you don't need forgiveness for becoming what you had to be. And that transformation, it was only the beginning. They thought exile would be your undoing, that silence would smother whatever fire was left in your bones. They never imagined silence could become your sanctuary. That in the absence of their noise, their lies, their venom, you'd finally hear your own truth echo loud enough to drown out the past. In that hollow quiet, they expected you to fade. Instead, you sharpened. Alone doesn't mean broken. It means unchained. They feared your rage before, but that was when it was scattered, when it was tangled in the need for their approval, their validation, their poisoned sense of loyalty. Alone, you felt it crystallize. Alone, you felt it become clean. Because in solitude, distractions die. In solitude, you finally see. They called it abandonment, but it was liberation dressed in loss. They thought they'd pulled the rug from beneath you. They didn't realize they removed the last thing anchoring you to a lesser version of yourself. And so you stared into the abyss they left you in. Days bled into nights with no one clapping for your effort, no one reaching out, no one watching. That's when the alchemy began. The kind of transformation that no audience ever sees. The kind of growth that no applause could nourish. You began to evolve not for them, not in spite of them, but because you'd found something more powerful than revenge: clarity. The revelation that their absence was not a void, but a canvas. A blank slate for you to rewrite your identity, not in reaction to pain, but in pursuit of power. What was once loneliness became solitude, and solitude became sanctuary. You stopped whispering your truths and began screaming them into the mirror. You confronted the parts of you they were too afraid to hold: the anger, the shame, the hunger. You stopped apologizing for the weight you carried. You named it, claimed it, let it fuel you. You understood that if they feared your fire when you were tethered, they'd be scorched by who you'd become without their chains. Solitude didn't silence you. It amplified your edge. It taught you to trust your instincts. It forced you to survive without applause, without praise, without a safety net. Now, you don't need a crowd to roar. You are the sound of thunder that rolls in uninvited. And when you walk back into the world, you are not walking in with a smile and soft eyes. They'll meet a gaze forged from sleepless nights and a voice steady from speaking into the void. You won't need to remind them of what they did. Your presence will be enough. Your survival is your vengeance. Your growth is your response. Because now, you don't want to be understood by them. You want to be remembered. And the storm that's coming next, it won't ask for permission. They sat in the dark towers of their own design, thrones built from lies and manipulation, whispering to each other in tones soaked with arrogance. They looked at you like a piece on their board, a pawn meant to move only when summoned, to serve a narrative you never agreed to. They believed you would remain shackled to the script they wrote long before you had the power to speak. But every move they made, every deceit they delivered with a smile, was a stitch in the shroud they wrapped around their own downfall. And now, they're choking on the thread. They called it control. But what they really held was illusion, a brittle, glass-thin image of dominance that cracked the moment you stopped pretending to be who they needed. You watched as they built their house of cards and crowned themselves kings. You played along, silent, observant. Every betrayal was a lesson. Every injustice a study in weakness disguised as power. You didn't just endure it, you documented it. And while they thought they were scripting your failure, you were architecting your rebellion, one shattered expectation at a time. There's a truth that tyrants forget. Cages don't kill the wild. They refine it. They concentrate it. And eventually, something ancient wakes up in the dark. You didn't need revenge. You needed memory. You needed those moments on your knees, back bleeding, soul screaming, to teach you what kind of storm you were becoming. They see the scars and think they've done damage. But what they left behind, that's armor now. You wear it like a second skin, not to hide the pain, but to showcase it. Prove that you didn't just survive, you were carved into someone they can no longer manipulate. Every scar is a map of your transformation. Not the weak kind they scoffed at, real transformation. The kind that emerges from being drowned and choosing to breathe salt water until you became the ocean. You were never theirs to mold, to use, to discard. You were always more than they imagined, and that terrified them. So they tried to shatter you into something digestible. But you can't dissect what you don't understand. They underestimated the brutality of your evolution. They thought the fire would consume you. They never thought you'd become the fire. And now, the knife they sharpened through years of betrayal, manipulation, abandonment, it doesn't rest in your back anymore. You pulled it out, made peace with it, and turned it into your own blade. It's in your hand now, resting against the throat of the world they built. They don't know it yet, but every power play they made was a suicide note in disguise. Because you were never meant to obey. You were born to ascend. They tried to contain a force that cannot be caged, and now they've awakened something ruthless. Something holy. Let them tremble. Let them doubt what they're seeing. Because when you rise, and you will rise, it won't be subtle. It won't be delicate. It will be a reckoning drenched in truth and edged with vengeance. Not born of pettiness, but of principle. You won't come for their crown. You'll dismantle the throne entirely. Because now, you decide where the story goes next. And the next chapter is already rising like a storm on the horizon. One that doesn't ask. One that takes. They thought fear would paralyze you. that it would freeze you in place, another broken spirit too afraid to rise, too haunted to act. But they didn't understand the shape of your fear. They didn't see that it was never a wall, it was a mirror. And you didn't turn away when you saw your reflection in its cracked surface. You stared back. And what looked like dread at first glance was adrenaline. What felt like doubt was just a call to sharpen your edge. Because fear, when mastered, doesn't chain you, it hones you. They assumed you'd hide, that you'd shrink in the presence of challenge, that the shadows would smother that last flicker in your soul. But you didn't go quiet. You adapted. You stopped expecting safety from a world built to exploit your silence. Fear wasn't the end of you, it was the beginning. It whispered truths no comfort ever could. It asked you the questions no one else dared. What are you without the mask? What do you become when there's nowhere left to run but through? And you answered not with words, but with movement, with resolve, with a fire that no one gave you permission to light. They tried to weaponize fear against you. They tried to corner you with it, cage you in it. But every time they threw it in your face, you inhaled it like oxygen. Fear didn't kill your spirit, it revealed it. It peeled back the layers until only the essential remained. The hunger, the rage, the relentless pulse of a soul too deep to drown. What they feared in you wasn't your potential, it was your inevitability. You stopped praying for peace when you realized war was the only language they understood. And if you were going to speak that language, you'd speak it fluently, your eyes fire, your steps thunder, your soul chaos wrapped in control. You walked into the storm and became it. And now they see you, not as the victim they mocked, not as the shadow they dismissed, but as the force they can't outrun. You don't need their recognition. Their fear is acknowledgement enough. Because now, when you move, the ground remembers. When you speak, the air trembles. You are no longer chasing survival, you are survival, personified. The myth they never believed in until it stood in front of them, unbending, eyes ablaze. They called you fragile. Now they call you fate. And this isn't your final form. This is the calm before the next breaking. The moment before the next threshold is shattered. You are not done yet. You are just getting louder. They believed time was a mercy. That if they left you long enough, ignored you, humiliated you, whispered their stories and buried yours, eventually you would rot in silence. That whatever defiance once burned in your chest would decay into regret. That you'd vanish like a scar forgotten under layers of new skin. They never realized that time isn't kind. It's a scalpel, a forge. And you, left in the dark, didn't wither. You evolved. You didn't just survive, it wasn't that simple. You crafted yourself. Hour by hour, wound by wound. You dug through the raw earth of your own soul, clawing past every lie you were taught about what you should be, burning off every trace of the mask they forced on you. Alone in that timeline, where others thought you were perishing, you were studying war. Studying them. And every tick of that clock was a drum beat, A slow march toward the reckoning you were building in silence. They kept hunting the version of you they remembered. The one who flinched. The one who still cared. They never stopped to realize that that version died the moment you chose yourself over their approval. They kept reaching with the same old weapons, not knowing you'd outgrown every one of them. Time didn't dull you. It made you surgical, precise, cold where you had to be, fire where it mattered. You became unrecognizable until the day they caught the glare of your eyes in the dark and understood you were the shadow trailing them all along. Watching, remembering, waiting, not for permission, for momentum. They thought they'd made you small, that you'd always be beneath them, some haunted whisper in the wind. But shadows grow longer in time. And monsters, they don't die. They adapt. They descend deeper into themselves and emerge as something too primal to be explained, too inevitable to be stopped. You became consequence. Now when they hear your name, it's no longer a footnote in their conquests. It's a warning. A curse. A storm they cannot outrun. You are the lesson they refused to learn, the reckoning made flesh. You are the reflection they can't bear to face because it reveals the truth. They were never in control. Never the hunter. Just fools playing God in a world where gods bleed and monsters endure. And while they stand trembling, too late to rewrite what's coming, you don't need to roar. The silence says enough. The prey always knows when it's too late to run. They mistook the scars as signatures of your ending. Saw your silence as the final chapter, the crumbling aftermath of a soul too heavy to carry forward. In their minds, you were the cautionary tale another caution scrawled on the edge of their comfort, a reminder of what happens when someone dares to stray beyond the lines. They never realized that you were never theirs to define. You were never written in their ink. Your story was not tragedy, it was alchemy. They labeled you broken because it made them feel intact. Because admitting your strength would force them to confront their own fragility. So they framed your pain as weakness, wrote your suffering as a flaw. But what they couldn't grasp is that your chaos wasn't collapse, it was creation. The tearing down before the rising. The primal scream before the breath of rebirth. You never belonged in their cages. You never fit their mold. And when the walls they built around you crumbled, you didn't retreat, you expanded. You spread like wildfire, like myth, like the kind of legend that survives long after bones are dust. You didn't rise to reclaim a place at their table, you rose to flip the whole thing and carve your own domain from the rubble. Every rule they wrote, you shattered. Every limit they placed on your name, you burned. You are not the aftermath. You are the origin. And the power that hums beneath your skin now, that isn't rage. That's resurrection. That's what it looks like when a soul stops asking permission to exist and begins owning the space it was born to command. They once called you unstable, now they call you unstoppable. They called you emotional, now they call you unshakable. And you didn't have to scream to be heard. You became the frequency too low for them to detect but too potent to ignore. You are a contradiction they can't contain. Chaos with precision. Fury with purpose. Destruction that rebuilds, over and over, in sharper, meaner, more sacred forms. You are not a ghost haunting what was. You are the architect of what's next. And their world. The one that tried to box you in, chain you down, define your worth by your silence. You've eclipsed it. You've become too vast for their vision, too raw for their comfort, too real for their fantasy. You outgrew every lie they told about you, every narrow dream they projected onto your back. You are not a tragedy. You are not a warning. You are the force that bends the next chapter into something ruthless and undeniable. And if they dare look again, they won't see someone crawling from the ashes. They'll see the one who set the fire. And so it ends not in silence, not in surrender, but in the roar of everything you've become. You've walked through fire, swallowed storms, and turned your wounds into weapons. This wasn't survival. This was reclamation. Every scar, every shadow, every moment they tried to erase you engraved into legacy. This is dark triumphs where the broken rise, the feared awaken, and the forgotten become legend. Not just a name, a manifesto, a war cry for the ones who were never supposed to make it. Because here, we don't bow, we become. And this is just the beginning.